Welcome to Echo of Crime YouTube channel. On May 1st, 2010, a frantic 911 call from a missing woman named Shannon Gilbert triggered what would become one of the largest and most unsettling criminal investigations in Long Island history. Shannon had run from a client's home in Oak Beach, terrified and disoriented, before disappearing into the marshland near Ocean Parkway. Police searched for her for months, but in December 2010, while looking for any trace of Shannon, they stumbled upon something entirely unexpected: the remains of another woman wrapped in burlap. Within days, 3 more sets of remains were found in the same area. The discovery stunned investigators and forced them to confront a chilling possibility. A serial killer might be operating on Long Island. The section of Ocean Parkway where the bodies were found was isolated, quiet, and tucked behind tall beach grass and brush. Investigators noted that the location suggested a killer who knew the area well, someone familiar with the hidden access points, patrol patterns, and abandoned stretches of road. The victims were identified as women who had advertised escort services online, and their disappearances had gone largely unnoticed until this moment. With each new discovery, law enforcement realized they were not dealing with a single missing person case, but a pattern that had stretched on for years. As the investigation expanded, the FBI, Suffolk County Police, and local detectives formed a task force to search the area more thoroughly. They uncovered additional remains further down the parkway, including unidentified victims and partial remains linked to earlier disappearances. Forensic teams combed the sandy soil, searching for fibers, digital clues, and any physical evidence that could point to a suspect. Meanwhile, the community watched in disbelief as the quiet beaches of Long Island transformed into a sprawling crime scene. What began as a missing person search had now become the hunt for a serial killer, one who, for reasons still unclear, had chosen this remote stretch of coastline as their dumping ground. As investigators widened their search along Ocean Parkway, the list of victims associated with the Long Island serial killer grew. The remains of women identified as Megan Waterman, Amber Costello, and Melissa Barthélemy were found within a short distance of one another, all wrapped in burlap and left carefully off the roadway. Detectives began studying the similarities: the victims' backgrounds, their online activity, the approximate time frames of their disappearances, and their final known locations. These patterns strongly suggested premeditation and organization. Whoever was responsible seemed to choose victims carefully, transport them discreetly, and return to the same isolated dumping grounds multiple times over the years. For more than a decade, little progress was made. The case passed through multiple police administrations, faced internal controversies, and suffered from delays and lost opportunities. Meanwhile, the families of the victims pushed relentlessly for answers, holding press conferences, organizing community marches, and demanding transparency from law enforcement. The victims' mothers and sisters often said the same thing: someone out there knew more than they were saying, and someone they believed was hiding in plain sight. Everything changed in 2022 when the newly formed Gilgo Beach Task Force adopted a more unified strategy. Investigators revisited thousands of pages of old case files, 911 logs, phone records, and digital footprints left behind by clients who had contacted the victims. Among them, a pattern emerged: repeated burner phone activity around the time of the disappearances, often connected to the same set of cell towers in Massapequa Park. Detectives began quietly tracing these signals and cross-referencing them with vehicle registrations, digital accounts, and travel histories. To their surprise, one name continued to reappear: Rex Heuermann, a well-established architect who lived just a short drive from Gilgo Beach. The home was ordinary from the outside, a weathered, decades-old residence on a suburban street lined with modest houses. But detectives noted its proximity to major roads, its privacy, and its lack of recent updates. In early surveillance operations, investigators observed Heuermann's daily routine: commuting into Manhattan, running errands, returning home late at night. Nothing about his outward behavior suggested involvement in a high-profile serial case. But the deeper investigators dug, the more unsettling the connections became. Phone records linked burner phones used to contact victims back to cell towers near Heuermann's home and office. Witness descriptions of a large man driving a dark-colored pickup truck matched his build and vehicle history. Forensic teams then began retrieving discarded items from public trash cans outside his office in Manhattan, a legal method often used in long-term investigations. DNA recovered from one of these items reportedly matched evidence found on one of the victim's remains. At that moment, investigators knew they were no longer chasing shadows. They had a primary suspect. As police continued monitoring Heuermann, they also examined his digital history, uncovering disturbing online searches, client records, and communication patterns detailed in later court filings. Some media outlets reported the existence of audio recordings and archived digital files that investigators believed could connect Heuermann to additional victims. While not all evidence has been publicly disclosed, court affidavits described years' worth of digital activity that aligned closely with the timeline of the murders. By the time the task force moved in, Heuermann had been under surveillance for months. His arrest in July 2023 stunned the nation, not only because he was a suburban father and successful architect, but because his home sat near families who had lived peacefully for decades, unaware of what investigators now believed had been happening behind closed doors. The quiet house that once blended into its surroundings became the center of a massive forensic search. Teams removed boxes of potential evidence, dug through the basement, uncovered old materials, and searched for tapes, documents, and digital devices. Neighbors watched in disbelief as the home where they had seen Heuermann mowing his lawn became one of the most scrutinized crime scenes in the country. The arrest didn't solve the case, but it opened a new chapter, one filled with revelations, sealed evidence, and unanswered questions that investigators are still working through today. After the arrest of Rex Heuermann in July 2023, investigators shifted their focus from pursuit to confirmation. The Gilgo Beach murders, long considered one of the most haunting and complex serial cases in America, now had a primary suspect, but the investigation was far from over. Detectives returned to decades of stored evidence. Old phone logs, digital files, videotapes seized from past searches, anonymous tips, and mountains of unprocessed material gathered since 2010. They needed to determine which pieces of evidence were connected, which were unrelated, and which could help build the strongest possible case. Inside Heuermann's home, forensic teams conducted one of the largest residential searches in Suffolk County history. Over multiple days, crime scene investigators carried out boxes labeled with categories like electronics, tapes, documents, and weapons. The basement, cluttered, cramped, and filled with decades-old storage, became a focal point. While much of what was found remains sealed under court order, investigators confirmed that numerous digital devices were recovered. Some contained archived online activity, including search histories and communication records that prosecutors say aligned with key moments in the victims' disappearances. Several media outlets also reported the existence of audio recordings, though their specific contents have not been publicly released. One of the most important breakthroughs came from forensic genealogy, the same investigative technique used to solve other long-cold cases. DNA evidence recovered from the victims had been inconclusive for years, but when detectives collected a discarded pizza crust from Heuermann in Manhattan, they were able to compare it with a hair fragment found on one of the bodies. According to court documents, the match significantly strengthened the case and provided a scientific link investigators had been seeking for more than a decade. Meanwhile, communities across Long Island reacted with a mixture of relief, shock, and unease. Neighbors who had lived next to Heuermann for years told reporters they had noticed nothing especially alarming about him, aside from the occasional argument or the clutter around his home. Many struggled to reconcile the mild-mannered architect with the violent crimes he is accused of committing. The case dominated news cycles for weeks, with reporters stationed outside the Massapequa Park home, while investigators continued to recover evidence. In court, prosecutors presented a timeline built on thousands of data points: burner phone activity, cell tower pings, digital footprints, eyewitness accounts, DNA comparisons, online communication logs, Each new hearing revealed more about how investigators had quietly tracked Heuermann for months before making the arrest. But even with these advancements, questions remain about whether all the victims discovered along Ocean Parkway were the work of one individual or multiple offenders. Some remains found further down the parkway differ significantly from the confirmed Gilgo Beach victims, and investigators continue to evaluate those cases separately. Today, the Long Island serial killer investigation is still active. More evidence may be unsealed, additional charges may be filed, and new connections may surface as digital analysts continue to sift through years of materials collected from Heuermann's home and office. While the arrest marked a major milestone, the full truth of what happened along Gilgo Beach may take years to uncover, and some answers may never be known. One thing is certain. The case that began with a single missing person search in 2010 has grown into one of the most far-reaching criminal investigations in American history. And with new evidence still emerging, the story of a Long Island serial killer is far from over.